My name is Major Michelle Rockers. I'm the Assistant Director and Executive Officer with the United States Marine Band, the President's Own. This year marks the 220th anniversary of the United States Marine Band, and so we're having a living history series and recounting some of our own history. But I wanted to take this opportunity to also recount the 75th anniversary and the historical significance of the United States Marine Corps' Women's Reserve Band that was formed in 1943 during World War II. It seemed that the 75th anniversary of the Women's Reserve Band was the perfect time to really showcase this history. I wish it would have been able to happen sooner, but many of us weren't even aware that this band had been in existence until I for me personally, became aware of Dr. Jill Sullivan's book. I had heard of the band existed, but learning more about it through her research and writing, it certainly brought it more to life in my eyes and made me want to do a feature.
My name is Jill Sullivan. I'm a professor at Arizona State University in the School of Music, and I teach music education courses and I do research. And my research, recently I wrote a book called Bands as Sisters, Women's Military Bands During World War II. I first became interested in this topic in the year 2000 when I was at the Midwest Band and Orchestra Conference in Chicago, and I was at a luncheon of women band directors, and serendipitously I was seated next to this woman by the name of Charlotte Plummer Owen, who I found out during the luncheon that she had been the conductor of the United States Marine Corps Women's Reserve Band. And I was told by the other women at the tables that women's bands existed during World War II, and I had not ever heard of that. And as soon as I heard about these bands, I decided pretty quickly that I wanted to do research and tell their story. And I was afraid if I didn't take this on as part of my research initiative at the university, then maybe no one else would. What I found doing this research is that the band women in most of the bands had stayed connected with one of the Women's Army Corps bands and with the Marine Corps Women's Reserve Band. They had stayed together after the war for 60 years. But the Marine Corps Women's Reserve Band was different. They had a woman by the name of Bonnie Smallwood Medine who had spent these 60 years putting together and sending out something called the Quarter Notes, which had kept all the women in the Marine Corps Women's Reserve Band connected for those 60 years. And once I found one member of the Marine Corps Women's Reserve Band, I had found them all. The Marine Corps had quite a wonderful way of recruiting to put together the 43-piece band that the publicity announcement had said they desired to have, 43 members. And it was really Captain Saddleman who was asked by Admiral Vandergrift to put together this band. And he did so by traveling to music schools and conservatories throughout the United States to audition women to be part of this group. This was different than the other women's bands of the other military units. They had the special mentoring of the United States Marine Band members. And so Captain Saddleman would go audition these young women, and they would then enlist to become part of the military. That wasn't always the case. Sometimes women who were already at Camp Lejeune when Captain Saddleman arrived to help with the startup of the band, he also went through the records of the women that were already at the base to see if any of them had band experience, and he would then ask them to come and audition.
In fact, two of my dearest friends throughout, and even now, had signed up for the motor pool. They were driving trucks. They thought that's where they were for the duration of the band. But no, it was discovered that one of them played tuba and one of them played drums, I guess. And so, of course, they were snatched out of the motor pool and went into the band. They were very good musicians, and they added a great deal to the band.
How they came about choosing a director was pretty an easy decision by the three mentors of the women's band. They noticed that Charlotte Plummer, who had come from Oregon and who had been recommended to be in the Marine Corps Women's Reserve Band by her clarinet professor from the University of Oregon. And Charlotte had been a soloist with the university band. She had had a long music history of playing piano, also playing a saxophone in her family's dance band. And she had also had the experience of being in a professional dance band before the war in California called Babe Egan's Hollywood Redheads. And so she had a vast amount of musical experience. She'd been a high school band director, too, for 3 or 4 years before the war, and she had been a conductor already, which was an experience that she said would have been unusual for other women at that time. And so she always said to me, so it came to be that I was in the right place at the right time.
The kind of band we became, I think, was due to Charlotte. She, in the first place, she came well equipped to conduct and lead a band. Of course, she didn't know anything about the military, but she adapted very, very quickly.
While I'm grateful that Dr. Jill Sullivan is here to walk us through the historical elements of this band and showcase some of the photography that she has been able to acquire over the years, I was responsible for putting together the musical selections, and I chose certain pieces specifically to showcase certain details. For example, in addition to marches that we'll be performing, we're starting off as a concert overture with Tchaikovsky's the finale from his Fourth Symphony, an arrangement for wind band, obviously. And I chose that piece particularly to showcase the technical abilities that band must have had, the high degree of musicianship that they must have been able to perform to be able to perform that particular piece, which is a challenging work for the Marine Band to perform to this day.
The Women's Marine Corps Band was quite a success. They were really terrific musicians. And they drew large crowds when they would go off base to perform. And it wasn't long before the United States government figured out that these women would be excellent role models for young women, maybe on the fence about whether or not they should enlist. And so the United States government sent them out to tour the country. And they actually went on 3 war bond tours throughout the wartime. And these women would go into towns in one town in Pennsylvania, it was reported to me that this town had lost 80% of their young men in battle. And so when they went to these towns, they connected. The townspeople wanted to talk to the women. And so the townspeople, first of all, would see the women march in a parade during the day to advertise their presence. And then at night, if the townspeople wanted to come to their concert, they had to pay $18.75 to buy a war bond that would be in 10 years worth $25. And once they came to the concert, they heard the women play an array of musical selections. And one of them, which was surely appropriate, was Johann Sebastian Bach's Jesu Man's Desiring. And in one concert in this town I previously mentioned, while they were playing the musical number and they looked out at the audience, the people in the audience were weeping and the women on stage started crying because the music was so beautiful. The women said the acoustics are great, the band was playing beautifully, and it really had a musical affect on anyone in the room or everyone in the room.
So other selections on the program are featuring some lighter music. We have a big band selection, Little Brown Jug, Glenn Miller's hit from that era, and also a Dixieland selection, Muskrat Ramble, just to feature a little bit about what these women were performing, what styles of music they were performing, but also to tell the story of where they were performing. Muskrat Ramble, a Dixieland tune like that. They had a Dixieland group within the ensemble that would often play for wounded warriors, and they were able to maneuver through hospitals with such a small group and to try to lift the spirits of these wounded veterans who were so broken coming back from the war. But they also had a big band that they would play for dances, they would play for war bonds, selling war bonds, and also playing to entertain the officers and the troops and lift spirits in that way as well.
The dance band we formed, and Charlotte, of course, Charlotte was as good as Benny Goodman. She was terrific on clarinet. She was wonderful. Pretty good on sax, too. So she wanted to form the dance band, and what we did was play for the dances at the Officers Club very, very often.
So I wanted to also feature, as part of this program, the Dream Hour show that these women had performed, the radio broadcast, in part to relive the experiences that they had in sitting in these seats that these men of the President's Own had been sitting in and performing from, but also to showcase this program in its entirety. That's the only existing recording that we have of this ensemble. And fortunately, Charlie Owens of the Marine Band had the foresight to ask for that program to be recorded so we could keep it in the archives.
The Dream Hour concert was significant to all these women. They told me in their interviews that it was one of the most important experiences being in that band. And there were several, but this was one that came. And it was an answer they often gave as something very important to them. They said to be sitting in the same spot where the United States Marine Band would perform on the weekly broadcast and taking their place was very significant. And at that time, if you were a musician and if you made it to making a radio broadcast in any way or being on a radio show, that was a big deal. That meant you made it as a musician. And on the national set, replacing the men's band, it became surreal to them. And they called home to their parents and asked their parents to please make sure they listened to them. It was very significant. So to call home and be able to communicate that you were going to be on a national radio broadcast performing would have been one of the biggest things any of these women would have done in their lives.
I also then selected Robert Schumann's Concertstück to feature 4 of our horn players. And the purpose behind that was a nod to the first woman joining the President's Own Marine Band, Ruth Johnson, who joined this particular band in 1973. I would venture to say that had it not been for the women back at that time and women 100 years ago joining the Marine Corps, that the paradigm would have taken longer to shift, and we still wouldn't have as many women in this organization today, and perhaps I wouldn't be in this position as the first female assistant director of the United States Marine Band. And so it is a huge debt of gratitude that I wish to pay to these women for their courage in paving that way for so many to follow.